It's your Locked On Flyers podcast for Thursday, October 6th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is so happy to once again have Mary Clarke here for a Flyers season preview.
It's the show you've been waiting for.
Your Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello in Flyers land. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here as always with the lovely and talented Russ Cohen, who is on Twitter at Sportsology. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. You can follow us on Twitter at Locked On Flyers, where you'll keep up to date on all the Flyers news and our episodes. You can also email the show at lockedonflyers@gmail.com. On today's show is that season preview with Mary Clarke. We've been doing it every year since the show started, so very happy to continue that tradition. Locked On Flyers is free and available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you are listening. So subscribe. You'll get all of our episodes here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Plus, we're over on YouTube, so watch and subscribe there as well. So without further ado, here is our conversation about this year's Flyers with Mary Clarke. All right, we are thrilled to welcome from For the Win, Mary Clarke, who is a longtime Flyers fan and was a podcaster on this very network for a while. So very excited to get her insights, as is tradition on Locked On Flyers, into the upcoming season. Welcome, Mary.
Hello, it's good to be here. It's been a while, Rachel, since we've last talked, and Russ, we haven't, I have not been on the podcast since you joined. So
I know, and I used to see you at practice or some other places.
Yeah. So we have, so we have a history between the three of us. So it's good to talk to you guys, and I'm excited to talk to you guys. I'm excited to talk to you guys more than I think that I'm excited to, watch the Flyers this season. But I'm sure we're going to get into it because, oh boy, this team is a mess, huh?
Yeah.
Well, that's my first question. And we talked to Jordan Hall last week. And the first question I asked him, I'm going to ask you. Are the Flyers, in fact, cursed?
I think so. I think the Flyers are cursed. I don't know who did it, what did it. We were riding that like little wave of time right before the pandemic started of like, it felt like nothing could touch the Flyers, like everything was great. And then suddenly it's like Charlie Brown and the football, it all gets snatched away from us. And yeah, I mean, there are teams in the NHL probably more cursed than the Flyers. You can look at the Maple Leafs, for example, and their, round 1, game 7 curse. That is, I don't know which is more tragic. Because you're like the Maple Leafs are essentially the face of the NHL, and to, continually fail in that regard, is embarrassment on a level I don't know if we Flyers fans can relate to, but this still sucks. Like, I think, the team is cursed. Everything that has gone wrong went wrong essentially for this team. All the injuries, the signings that went wrong for Chuck Fletcher. I mean, the Tony DeAngelo stuff too. Like, it is just, I think I don't want to put this out there because I don't want to jinx it, but it would be so Flyers this year to, go after Patrick Kane of all players right before the trade deadline. So that's just, the stuff with him. But then, of course, the Flyers didn't pick him in the draft. Like, they weren't able to. So, like, it feels like we're heading towards that direction. Like, you have to expect the worst with this Flyers team just overall. And, like, God bless us Flyers fans, really, for sticking with this team for as long as we have, because right now they're not giving us a whole lot to, cheer for. And, maybe, Rachel, you can, change my ways here and give me something to cheer for. But right now it is just, it's so bad.
It's hard. I mean, we've talked about that regularly on this show as far as Flyers fans looking for something to be excited about. But okay, so you brought up DeAngelo. The thing that I'll ask you about DeAngelo is the other night, he put the Flyers sweater on for the first time and he had a bad game.
Mhm.
And it does make you wonder, how much of an adjustment there will be for him playing in his hometown, because I've seen players do this in other sports, and it's happened in hockey too, where all of a sudden they go to their hometown, and while they think it's going to be great, all the other distractions sort of get to them. How do you think that's going to fall out for him?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of pressure to it, obviously. Like, coming back to your hometown is for a sports player pretty big. And, you see some players like it, sometimes thrive in it, but it's the pressure gets to you, especially in a city like Philadelphia. I know that not all eyes are on the Flyers at all times. I mean, now it's Eagles town because we know how good
Right.
the Eagles have been recently. So the Eagles are probably going to take a lot of, the eyeballs and the sports talk radio and stuff in Philadelphia, but still, like, people care about the Flyers. It's clear that they still do, and coming into a new city with a new team, and D'Angelo's partnered with a player not as good as who is he with last year, Jacob Slavin.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got
Mhm.
he's got Provorov, who is still a good defender, but not on Jacob Slavin's level. So
No.
it's going to be an adjustment. Basically, D'Angelo is going from a team in the Hurricanes that are, basically perennial playoff contenders, like, making it out of the first round consistently. Sure, they have some roadblocks in the playoffs, and a lot of that last year was due to injuries in net that kind of failed them. But that team is as stacked as they come, basically. They're always in the mix for being a Stanley Cup contender, so it's going to be an adjustment period for D'Angelo. Like, I'm sure he will, turn out to be like a good hockey player that puts up points for the team because somebody's going to have to score on this team. Um, but it's just, I think it's going to take an adjustment, but I wouldn't be surprised if he takes a step back this year just because of all the factors. I mean, I think like the hometown stuff he'll probably get over, because that's just the more you do it, the more you get used to it,
Yeah.
as everything is in this world. But I definitely think regression is probably coming for him just based on the fact that the Flyers are not nearly as good overall as the Hurricanes are, and his partner is not nearly as good as Jacob Slavin is.
I think the biggest difference, honestly, between last season and this season is having John Tortorella behind
Mm.
the bench. What do you think his impact will be this season? And, like, what do you think the biggest difference in this team will be with him there?
Well, everything we've heard out of training camp, so far with Tortorella is that he's skating the players hard, and he's trying to instill, a base level of discipline and also just like conditioning. I don't remember. I think it was the most recent preseason game that the Flyers did that they came out like completely flat in the
Hmm.
second period. And it was just like it's the same old from the Flyers. This happens all the time where either they don't start games on time, basically, or they have a completely flat period and their opponent like scores a couple and the game gets away from them and they can't come back. um Tortorella should at least improve the baseline of this team, hopefully. Like, we know what Tortorella brings as a coach. He's a hard-nosed coach. He expects the players to have a certain level of conditioning and training and pushes them hard. And, I know people have gone back and forth on whether that style is effective, but it could be what this Flyers team needs to at least get them to a level of competency that we haven't really seen from them in a while. I still think it's going to take a miracle for Tortorella to, like, get stuff out of this team to make them a playoff contender. I don't have high hopes for that because I think this team's talent is just like with all of the injuries they have, it is just it you can only do so much. But at least he's going to make them a more competent team that skates around on the ice. It's just I think it's just going to be so hard, especially in the Metro where, you're facing down a bunch of other teams and in the East in general where, the hardest division in the East is the hardest division in the NHL is the Atlantic. So there's just a lot of factors at play here that, if the Flyers play better, it's going to be because of what the mentality Tortorella instills in them. And hey, at least he's good for a quote or two, which, is something to look forward to at least. So that's at least a storyline I'm looking forward to outside of the ice is just, towards his interaction with the media. And, it's gonna be a good time at least in that regard. But I believe that Tortorella is definitely going to be tested here to get this team to try and get to a playoff spot because it doesn't feel like they can with the talent they have.
Yeah.
Up next, we'll have more with Mary on the Flyers going into this season. But first, we're going to hear about our friends at Bet Online.
BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news and podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to get in all your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online, where the game starts. Now, looking at what we've seen so far, the issue is with the Flyers before, and I'm not a big shot guy. Like, as long as the puck goes in, it's not the end of the world once in a while to get outshot. But the Flyers continually get outshot, and if they're going to be like John Tortorella's team, where they're living in their own end, they're not a good quick strike team, and they're getting a goal a game so far for the most last couple, and they are getting outshot, at times tremendously, sometimes embarrassingly, and it does worry me that they don't have the personnel to pull off what Tortorella wants to pull off here.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, like, if we had, Sean Couturier at the very least, like, there's at least some, like, basically pin to put in this team to be like, this is the linchpin, but they're kind of directionless right now. They kind of need at least one player to step up. And I don't know if you'll ask me about this later, but to me, I'm looking at like the young kids basically, like, Noah Cates
hmm
and, Morgan Frost to take a step, Bobby Brink when he comes back from injury, Joel Farabee when he's back. Like I'm looking towards those players to make an impact, and Tortorella says he's going to play them, so we'll see. But like for me, it's just like it's so rough because like the anchors we had on this team for so long are gone. I mean, Drew traded away, and he was the anchor of this team for so
hmm
long. Somebody you could rely upon at least. There was nobody that cared more about the Flyers, it felt like, than Drew. And it showed on the ice and how much he tried to do. And, sometimes he failed in that regard, but because he cared so much, it seemed like he put too much on his shoulders. And then, Couturier always kind of like, the silent warrior out there, kind of underrated in aspects. Of course, he won a Selke, but like, it always felt like in the grand conversation of things in the NHL, he was underrated. And now he's injured and probably going to miss the whole season if reports are to be believed. And, we only got 4 games of Ryan Ellis too, who's an NHL vet, stable presence back there on defense. And just, the linchpins of this team are gone. You can look to players like, Kevin Hayes might honestly be somebody that you look to for that kind of leadership. Hayes, Konechny, Provorov, probably. Like there are players, and Cam Atkinson too. He's a Tortorella guy. He's played for him before. So like there are pieces there. It's just going to take on a new shape this year for the Flyers, and it's. I mean, I think it's going to be tough for Tortorella to play the system he wants, but he does have a lot of hard nosed grinding players, as we've seen with some of the acquisitions like Nick Delorier and whatnot. So they're at least going to play Flyers hockey, which is what they talked about.
hmm
And it might not be, the most fun style of hockey and, the most offensive style of hockey, but they may finally have a team identity again. So there's something at least.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to do the Torts way of creating offense through good defense.
Mhm.
Ostensibly, the problem is like, can they have the good defense and discipline to do it in order to generate that offense? Because they've had problems, getting the puck out of the zone sometimes and carrying it down and having good zone entries where they're in a good position to make a play of it. But so I think that's really the big linchpin here for this season and whether or not they can take steps forward. But sort of speaking of that defensive side of the things, obviously, with Provy and D'Angelo being your top pair, and then you have Sanheim and Risto is a giant question mark as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
Like, where do you see the defense coming together in order to generate that offense?
You have to hope basically it starts from the top down that, Provorov and D'Angelo can, find a partnership together. And on paper, like it feels like they should work together because, D'Angelo is the offensive guy and Provorov is more of, playing the defense. And there's a reason people don't want Provorov out there on the power play. Like, he's
hmm
not going to be the offensive generating guy, but if you stick him with a guy like D'Angelo, they should mesh together. So that for me is where it all comes together. That pairing has to work because like I said, on paper, it's what should work. So after that, like, things can, trickle down basically. And, Sanheim and Risto, I mean, Risto got ragged on a lot last year, and still probably going to, because, the contract he was given really doesn't fit with the type of, player and performance that he brings. But, we're kind of stuck with him. So if you give him basically probably the Flyers' best, maybe overall defenseman in Sanheim, that should hopefully, rise him up a little bit to a better level. And then that last spot is kind of just like a flex between, Cam York and then, Justin Braun, perhaps Ronnie Attard. Like, there's a lot of ways they could go with this. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Cam York can do. It's not the most ideal situation for him to be in, but like the new blood this Flyers team has is the most compelling thing, I think, to me overall. We know what Provorov is. We know what D'Angelo is. We know what Sanheim is now. And we know what, Braun and Risto are. But like, York is kind of an unknown, and all of the younger players on this roster, at least give me a little bit of hope, because there's no way that all of the prospects the Flyers have just don't turn out. Somebody has to work, right? Like somebody has to work. So I'm at least keeping my eye on that throughout the season. But for me, the big linchpin is the fact that, Provorov and D'Angelo have to basically work. They don't have to be, incredible out there. They just need to be competent enough for Tortorella's system to work and for it to trickle down the rest of the way. Because if, we're doing line shuffling in the first week already and it's not working, like, it's not going to go well, I think, for this defense. And it's going to fall apart essentially. So that pairing needs to work for the rest of the defense to have a chance basically at finding some sort of stability.
So question for me, Mary, is can Carter Hart play 50 games in a season? I don't know if he can.
Ooh.
He's never played 50 games in a season. And
Mhm.
if Sandstrom or Grosnick have to play more than 30, this team's in trouble. And I like Sandstrom, but he doesn't have a track record of playing that many NHL games, so he could have some hiccups. What do you think?
Oh boy. Well, Carter Hart has, I just looked it up real quick. The most he's played in a season is 45 games, and that was last year. That's a big question mark. There's no real, like for the past couple of seasons, or for a while at least, there's always been some sort of veteran back there behind Carter Hart.
Right.
The basically the corpse of Brian Elliott or Martin Jones or somebody back there that was at least, I don't want to say reliable, but like a veteran, like somebody you could at
bail
least,
him out in bad
yeah,
spots, bad
exactly,
moments. Yeah.
exactly. And it's like, sure, we didn't want the Flyers to tout out Brian Elliott for half the season because that was bad. He's better in moderation, but now we don't have that this year, and the whole situation, with the Russian goaltender and everything there just really kind of threw things up in the air for the Flyers, because he was kind of supposed to be possibly the the guy behind Carter Hart if everything worked out as well as they wanted to, it seems. But you've got Hart, who has to play at least a majority of the games this year, and then you've got Sandstrom, and it's just like, yeah, it's not an ideal situation. They have to basically hope that Carter Hart has rebounded. I don't think he's going to be, the goaltender we all thought he could be, Carey Price incarnate, essentially. And that sucks that it feels like, he's not lived up to his potential, but Hart can still be a really, really good goaltender.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of has to prove that, this is who he is, instead of, the player that has, faltered at times and had, real tough, like, I don't necessarily blame him for the seasons that happened during the pandemic when he was like, we were all floundering out there mentally, essentially. And it was rough for all of us. So like, it sucks, but like that can still stick with you. But I would like to think that, Hart can get over that mentally and, center himself. But, he doesn't have, a safety net anymore, basically. And I'll at least be interested to see what they can do in goaltender, like, with the goalies behind him. But, it could be really rough if Hart doesn't have a good year or he gets injured. Or also, of course, there's the stuff with Hockey Canada, which obviously we don't know anything about, but
Right.
he was on
Yeah.
that team, so we have no idea how the repercussions of that will play out. Like I said, that's all alleged and stuff like that, so I'm not like pointing fingers. I'm just saying that is at least something to consider with the goaltending situation this year. So just something to keep an eye on for sure. But it's there's a lot going to be thrown at Carter Hart this year, and he's going to have to rise to the occasion, basically, or the goaltending position is going to flounder. And you know how it is with goalies. If you don't have a good goalie, you're kind of sunk. So it's going to be a lot for Hart this year.
I do want to ask you, like, what do you think is the best case scenario for this team? And along with it, like, what do you think they need to accomplish in order to win back maybe the fans that were angry about this offseason?
Oh boy, because it's weird. You would think the best case scenario would be to make the playoffs, but it almost feels like the best case scenario isn't to make the playoffs and is to fail spectacularly. I'm one of those fans that, I've been optimistic about this Flyers team. Rachel, you guys know me. You've seen me. You've talked to me on Twitter. I'm pretty optimistic, but I think that there's something fundamentally broken about the Flyers overall in terms of just like the ideals that they want to put into a hockey team.
Well, Torts has pointed it out. Like, he sees the problem there, but will it get fixed this year? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. But like, you look at a team, like the teams that have made the Stanley Cup final, the Colorado Avalanche, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and you look at a team like the Flyers, and the mentalities could not be more different. The Flyers are still hanging on to that, like, Broad Street Bullies era. It's ingrained in their blood. And I get it. Like, those won you, like, that era won you cups, but we are not in 1975, 76 anymore. Like, those years are long gone. And the NHL is now morphed into, like a high speed game, a high skill game with, players like Cale Makar and Connor McDavid and, Nikita Kucherov and stuff like that. And there's no one like that on the Flyers. Even a team like the Montreal Canadiens who have, who made the Stanley Cup final, then bottomed out, have a bit of hope because a coach like Martin St. Louis is bringing new ideas into the NHL, and the team is really responding to that. And they've got a lot of really good young players that I'm looking forward to watching. And I look at the Flyers and I see that they're stuck in this old boys mentality. And
okay, so just because you brought up St. Louis, I have to double down on this one because I don't know how you feel on it. At the draft, I was stunned when the Flyers didn't take Cole Caulfield. Certainly Martin St. Louis has unlocked Cole Caulfield with that shot and everything else. And the Flyers are still looking for a guy like that, and they could have had that guy. What is your feeling about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a mistake. Like, we all like it. It's hard. It is hard to draft. Drafting is not easy. I know I'm getting off of the point we were originally talking about. But drafting,
It's all good.
But this plays into it. No, but this plays into it. It does.
Drafting isn't easy. And I get that, like, you want to take a player that you think would fit in your system. But if you look at the type of things Cole Caulfield brings, and the thing about him was his size, was it not? Like, his whole thing against him was the fact that he's small. He can score goals, but he's small. And that type of like player model does not fit with what the Flyers view, like their organization. Like, it's not an organizational goal for them. And the Canadians are now reaping the rewards of, taking a player like that. And I don't even remember who the Flyers picked. Honestly, it wasn't Bobby Brink, was it?
Well, they made the trade to go down, and then York and Brink were who they ended up getting.
Yeah.
So,
thank you. Yes. The year's just all muddled.
Oh, no, I get it. I get it. Only because I'm at the draft every year and I do it on the radio. Do I have to remember?
That's fair. And covering the NHL as a whole at my website, it's one of those things where it's like, I can't always pick out certain details, but thank you. But yeah, it all goes back to that like old school mentality. So I know that it might not be what Flyers fans want to hear, but it feels like if the Flyers made the playoffs, which in probably the Flyers' minds is their best case scenario, that, they make the playoffs. But what does that get you? You make the playoffs, you're not going to make it out of the first round. Like, it would be really, really like John Tortorella would have to be a miracle worker, basically, to make this work. With the way this team is structured, they just don't have the talent to compete with, the upper echelon teams. They just don't. And, you make the playoffs or you barely miss out. And then you're stuck in that, level of mediocrity where you're
it's
like
that mushy area.
Yeah, where you don't want to be. You don't want to be that. You either want to be competing year after year or you want to be really bad.
Yeah.
So like, for me, the best case scenario is if the Flyers completely just flop this year. And it would be painful to watch. It'll be absolutely painful to watch. But, at the end, there'd be a light at the end of the tunnel where, like, the team moves on from some people in the front office that are continuing to, espouse these ideals and stuff. And it is just, that's the only way forward I can see for this team to have a future that looks as bright as, you know, the Canadians do, or
Mhm.
the Lightning still have, or the
Mhm.
Avalanche, or even the Rangers. I know the Rangers kind of fell backwards into their rebuild or whatever by, you know, drafting, you know, Capo Caco and Alexis Lafreniere, but
Mhm.
like, but even then, like, they haven't been the stars of that team. It's
No.
been their other players and an incredible goaltender too.
Mhm.
So like, it is just, for me, that is the best case scenario in my mind, because it works out better towards the Flyers' future, because we've seen the same song and dance over and over again. If they are middling, if they make the playoffs but miss, like, the don't get out of the first round, they're picking like, you know, 17th, 18th, whatever it
Yeah.
is. Or if they barely miss the playoffs, they're picking like 12th, 13th, whatever it is.
Right.
Like, you don't want to be there. You want to be in that top spot, like that top, like top 5,
Mhm.
basically. And it is
Mhm.
just, you know, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if Tortorella can raise them high enough to get them out of that. But I don't know. I think it's going to be a real challenge. But for me, that is the best case scenario. I know it might not be what Flyers fans want to hear, because they want to have hope in this team again, and they want to, you know, they want to be excited about hockey. Like, we were talking before we recorded about the Phillies just absolutely imploding. It is just like, it's just a mess. And like, people want to be excited about something in this town. Right now it's the Eagles, and you know what? That's fair, because they seem really good right now.
Yeah.
But like, the Flyers can have some sort of success like that. There is a market. There's obviously a market for hockey in this town, and people are big fans of the team. And for me, it'll be incredibly painful to watch this season, but I think that it's probably the best avenue for this team to go down, just because I can't see a route where this style of hockey and this mentality takes them to the Stanley Cup final, unless for some reason Chuck Fletcher suddenly is able to, you know, manipulate trades in a manner that he's able to win them. And, you know, we saw this year with the Johnny Gaudreau stuff that he hasn't been able to manipulate other GMs into, you know, getting the things he wants. And it is just, yeah, that's the way I see it. And I know that's probably not going to be the answer some Flyers fans want to hear, but and you know me, I'm an optimistic person.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's just, it's tough. They back themselves into a corner, and there's no real good answer on the way out, honestly.
Yeah, I think they have to get better, but with an intention to it, that
Mm.
moves that management makes and things that the coaches do push them in that direction. It just can't be accidental success, I think,
Right.
for
Yeah.
fans to really take hold of this team again in that way.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's just, a lot of it lays at the feet of Chuck Fletcher, who really lost fans by not getting Johnny Gaudreau. That was the big nail in the coffin. Like, sure, the Ryan Ellis deal didn't work out. It happens. And, you know, the players that they traded away, Nolan Patrick especially, I feel super bad for, but he's not going to play this season for Vegas. Just sometimes trades like that don't work out. But to completely miss, then not even try, like not even step up to the batter's box really to go after Gaudreau
And
is,
they
for
knew
me.
a year ago, so they could have tried to prepare cap wise. And Goudreau was waiting. It's not
Mhm.
like it wasn't like Columbus was his choice. He was
Yeah.
waiting, and he was shocked that the Flyers didn't contact him.
Yeah. And I know I don't want to rehash the whole thing again, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that was really, you know, the nail in the coffin, for like the final nail in the coffin for a lot of people, me included. I was like, you should have known, like, that Gaudreau wanted to be on this team, and,
Right.
you know, wanted it for years. And, you know, a competent general manager would have tried, and it doesn't seem like Fletcher tried at all. Like, if he like, you know, he didn't want to give up a first round pick, you know, to package JVR to move him. Like, it is just, sometimes you got to give in order to get, and he just
Mhm.
didn't want to give, and now he doesn't have anything. So yeah, a lot of it lays at the feet of Chuck Fletcher. And I don't know what would I don't know what he could do to win fans back, honestly, because it felt like the Johnny Gaudreau thing was like a home run he could have just sailed on for the rest of his Flyers career. He could have done whatever, and, you know, but if he brought in Gaudreau, people would have been okay. But now there's no wins here for him. Like, that there really isn't. And, you know, the players he brought in, D'Angelo, Risto, are not fan favorites for one reason or another. And it's just, it's hard to look at the, you know, what he's done in his tenure here, and, you know, see him as like having accumulated any wins in the fan base's eyes. And honestly, at this point, I don't know what it's going to take because this team needs a lot of stuff and the cap is as tight as it is. And it's not going to go up for another couple of years. And just, I don't think he's going to last that long. So he's kind of stuck at this point.
All right, to wrap things up here, Mary, you cover the whole league as part of your work at For the Win. Do you have any bold predictions for anything in the NHL this season?
Well, looking at the Metro specifically, I don't think the Capitals are going to make the playoffs. I think Alex Ovechkin might hit 50 again, but that team is, I think, the oldest in the NHL, and I don't believe in them. Like Ovechkin can only take them so far, and I'm rooting for him to break Gretzky's record, but I just don't see them making the playoffs. I see a team like the Islanders kind of returning to form. They lost Barry Trotz, but they still have the same players and they're also not on like a brutal 5-week schedule, like away schedule to open their season. So I think the Islanders are a team to bounce back. I see a team like Florida kind of taking a step back. I know that's probably kind of like not a hot take specifically or a bold prediction. But they traded for Matthew Tkachuk in the offseason and they lost some really good players in that trade in return, Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar. And for me, it might not, equal, like the scales basically might not balance. Tkachuk is an incredible player and I'm looking forward to watching him on the Panthers this year. But it just, for me, I think that they got worse and will probably take a step back. I want to see Ottawa in the playoffs really, really badly.
There's
Like
a chance.
I want to see them in the playoffs really badly. One for Giroux because, I still love them, but they had such an incredible offseason. People dunked on Pierre Dorian when he was like, the rebuild is over. And that quote was a year ago. If you forget, that quote was a year ago. And like, he's about to have the last laugh on all of us, I think. And I'm really looking forward to watching them. As for any other bold predictions, I'm trying to think of things out in the West. I think the Flames will probably be like the second best team out there. The Avalanche, obviously still incredible. I'm looking at the Kings as a team that could, continue to, surprise as a dark horse. I also wouldn't be surprised if Seattle kind of makes a playoff push this year. You've got Shane Wright and Matty Beniers down there. And like, I'm looking forward to seeing what they're building. Of course, Dave Haxtell is still the coach, and we Flyers fans kind of know what he brings to the table, but I'm looking forward to seeing what the Kraken can do. And I know that, their expansion draft wasn't what everybody thought like it should be compared to, a team like the Golden Knights, but I think that their future is kind of bright and they're kind of my second adopted team now that the Flyers have, kind of lost me a little bit. So maybe that's a little personal wish fulfillment there, but I really think that Seattle could actually, like, I know people predicted it last year and you don't look at my predictions last year. That was wrong. And Seattle was bad. Don't listen to me. But like, I think this year might actually be the year for them to, take a step forward and maybe try and make a playoff push. But, that's kind of how I see the NHL as a whole. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun. We've got another fun 82 game season ahead of us. And, there's going to be some surprises, I think. And, some teams that we once thought were kind of powerhouses might honestly falter. And yeah, it's going to be a good time. I'm looking forward to having hockey back in my life, honestly.
Nice. All right, Mary, where can people find you out there?
Okay. You can find me on Twitter at Mary C. Clarke, and you can read my stuff at For the Win. Anywhere you read stuff on your tablet, your computer, your phone, et cetera, et cetera. I've had a handful of hockey season preview stuff go out already, so just keep an eye on my Twitter and you'll see that stuff. But yeah, doing hockey, but also doing stuff like football and baseball and crying about the Phillies, but hey, at least the Eagles are good. So that's where you can find me and you can check out my stuff.
All right. Once again, thank you so much to Mary Clarke for
She's
joining
great.
us. She is so much fun to talk to. She also writes about video games, so definitely check out her content over at For the Win. That will do it for today's show. We'll be back again on Friday with the latest from training camp, final roster predictions, really talk about kind of who got the best opportunities and who got hosed at camp. I think that'll be a really interesting discussion. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So send in your questions or thoughts on the Flyers via Twitter at Locked On Flyers, or you can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
You made us your first listen today. Now make your second listen Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. So stay up to date on everything in the hockey world with Locked On NHL, your daily NHL podcast. Have a great day, everyone.